Hello Leica fans, I've just finished 9 Leica workshops in October, and so I thought it might be interesting to you guys to share 9 things I learnt, hopefully in roughly 9 minutes from the last 9 workshops. Let's jump straight in. Hi guys, Matt here from MrLeica.com. Observation number 1, the most popular Leica camera I'm seeing coming to my workshops is the latest release, the Leica M11 60 megapixel Leica M-mount camera. This seems to be the first choice if people can get one, and the second choice for those interested seems to be normally the most popular is the Leica M10 monochrome. So if you're an M10 monochrome fan, smash the like button. There seems to be a lot of love for that camera. Observation number 2, the most popular lens I'm seeing is the Leica Noctilux 50mm f/0.95. Most of the workshops I teach are portrait photography or model photography, and so it probably makes sense that people are bringing their fast 50mm lenses, but that lens does seem to be a popular favourite amongst many photographers. As a bonus point, the most popular 35mm lens that I see is the Leica Summer Lux 35mm f1.4 FLE lens, the spherical lens. For those that love 35mm, that seems to be pretty much the only lens that I see. I've seen a couple of 35 Apo M lenses, but otherwise it's all Summer Luxes, like across the board. Observation number 3, most people that are using these M cameras seem to be kitting them up to be closer to an SL camera. So almost everybody uses a M grip to give something a bit more to hold on to. Many people seem to love the thumbs up grip, the one that clips onto your cold shoe or accessory shoe. And almost everybody that's using the fast 50mm lens is also combining that with a Leica M11 VisioFlex or viewfinder, the rectangular one, the latest one. So by the time you've added a grip, like the thumb support and an EVF, there is a bit of an argument that you might actually prefer an SL series camera, which is even better EVF compared to the accessory EVFs that you can get. Observation number 4, the most popular focal lens are 35mm and 50mm from the people that I meet. I think I've seen one 28mm lens, but it wasn't really used much. And I think I've seen one 90mm lens. I did a review on that lens. And everybody else is using 35s and 50s. This makes sense if you're an M shooter. I think if you want to shoot 90s, again, there's a bit of an argument. You might prefer SL cameras. And if you love 28mm, then of course you'd probably be better off with a Leica Q series camera. Observation number 5, people that own one Leica often own more than one Leica. So it seems quite popular, obviously me included. Once you realise that you really love Leica cameras, you're like, yeah, I quite like that one as well, and then maybe that one as well. And you can normally find a good argument as to why you may need a second or potentially third Leica M-mount camera. So most people, as I say, are using probably the M11 as their main camera. And then as a second body, they'll probably use either a monochrome, so M10 monochrome seems to be one of the most popular cameras that I see. And then if they're a film shooter, something like the MP seems to be the most popular, but also you could use the MA or the latest M6 release. I've not actually seen the latest M6 yet, so hopefully I'll see one of those in a future workshop. Observation number 6, Leica photographers seem to love Leica lenses. So I don't think I've seen any, maybe a couple, almost from 9 shoots, I've only maybe seen 1 or 2 non-Leica lenses. So Leica photographers, if you're going to spend a lot of money on a Leica camera, it probably makes sense that you then want to spend a lot of money on a Leica lens, because otherwise you probably feel like you're dirtying your nice camera with a cheap lens. What I would say is I wouldn't limit yourself necessarily to only Leica. Yes, Leica are great, but they're not always the best, despite what you may think. If you love the brand, then yeah, fair enough, stick to Leica. But if you just want nice images, then it's probably worth taking the blinkers off sometimes and looking a bit wider. As you know, if you follow this channel, I like to keep things real. So as well as having Leica lenses with me, I'll also have some vintage lenses and non-Leica branded lenses. So in the last workshop in London, I was using the Jupiter 9, which is an 85 f2 Soviet lens. You can probably pick it up for the same price as a lens cap for a modern Leica camera. Like, not joking, maybe £70. So maybe a front and a back lens cap for Leica. Ridiculously cheap, and it was outperforming all the Leica lenses because it was giving me a 85 f2 focal length compared to, say, a fast 50 or 35mm. The physics of a 85mm lens is going to give you a more flattering portrait than a 50mm or 35mm. So if you spent all your money on your favourite lens, say it is a 50mm lens, I would highly recommend you to perhaps spend a little bit of money on a cheap lens and just use it 5% of the time when you need a long lens. I can give a real example. When I sold my Leica Summicron 75 f2 Apo and replaced it with the Voigtlander Nocturne 75 1.5 because I own both, and the Voigtlander gave much nicer images. So that's just one example where Leica isn't necessarily the best choice for your camera. Many people seem to really limit themselves within the little Leica box. And sometimes you feel a bit sorry for them. It's like, do you want to try a non-Leica lens? It'll actually take nicer photos. Probably the quote of the month from one of the models. I was taking some photos with my, I think it was a vintage 50mm Scimitar f2 lens on the SL. And then one of the students, I think it was Jim, he took a photo with his M10 monochrome. And I asked him to show Phoebe it was, the back of the camera, so she knows what he's taking a photo of. And she's like, "Oh, I think I need more makeup." Basically, the M10 monochrome was so sharp combined with the 50 f2 Apo. So both of those combined, the model, who has no interest in cameras, but yet was a very experienced model, she could see straight away there was so much detail on her face that she was now a bit unsecure about her face. So she went away for 5 minutes and plastered loads more makeup on. So models don't necessarily want the sharpest lens, I guess is what we're saying here. I'd say the best middle ground would be something like the 50mm 0.95 that you guys like a lot, where it's sharp, say, on the eyes, but then everything else is soft. They will like it and you will like it because it's a high-performing lens. Observation number 7. Most of the people come to the workshops, and especially the M11 users, all seem to be of a similar type. They're all very hard-working, normally very smart people with high-pressure jobs, but really nice people, and often using photography as kind of their bit of downtime or creative time to get away and forget about the day job for the day. It's really nice for me being in company with really smart people. I can always learn plenty, and yeah, there's your average nice guy that does happen to have a high pressure job. Coming in at number 8, I think it is. This is a bit more geeky relating to M11s, but also I think some of you M10 users. I don't actually own an M10, so this is my understanding. So the problem with the M11 and also M10s is you've got a touchscreen display on the back. And so when your nose or your hand touches, say, for example, the bottom left-hand corner, it's going to move your focus point, which is only a problem if you're using the EVF. So the problem I saw is people were zooming in with the EVF, and then when they picked up the camera, the focus point would move, and then they couldn't find it. So I did some research on the various Leica forums, and it seems there's not actually a current cure for this with the Leica firmware. And the best thing you can do to kind of get around this is just set your settings to extended EVF, and that should hopefully minimise the problems but not get rid of it completely. Like if you're watching this, this is a bit of an oversight on your part and something to correct in your next firmware update. Talking of the M11, another thing that I noticed where this may help you if you're struggling with any camera with an EVF, Leica camera. If you're really struggling to hit focus with your Leica camera and your fast lens using an EVF on the top of your M camera, there's a good chance you've not increased your magnification to the maximum on the EVF. One of my students that came to me last weekend had just come from Germany, from the Leica guys, and he had asked them, he's like, look, I'm not hitting focus with my 50 0.95. And they're like, well, we can't service your lens within a day that you're here, so basically you'll have to send your lens in if you want it fixed. And what had happened was he wasn't using the highest magnification on the EVF, so he wasn't able to see clearly enough to be able to hit focus. So he comes to me, I quickly increase the magnification to maximum, and then done. If this doesn't make sense, just write to me on mrleica.com and I'll help you out. Like the M11s, for example, are being shipped where some of them are not working. This again happened to the student that came at the weekend, bought a brand new M11 for lots and lots of dollars, and it didn't work. So they had to ship him a new M11. And there's also a video on this of YouTube for another person that bought the M11. So it seems to have some glitches with the new ones going out, and when you're paying that much for like a camera, it's not brilliant for the brand, is it? I don't think. And that brings me on nicely to number 9. Leica cameras are not for everybody. So again, I had a student with me at the weekend, a different one, who was from New York, and we met in Notting Hill in London, and he'd bought an M10 and then he struggled with it, so he sold it, and then he bought an M10 Reporter, really nice camera. I can bring up a photo, and he was still struggling. So he reached out to me and he's like, I want to check if I'm doing things correctly before I sell my Leica. He was trying to use it for street photography, but he just wasn't enjoying the experience. And so this may relate to some of you if you're not enjoying your Leica camera. If you've come from, say, a DSLR where what you see is what you get, where you look through the lens and you can see the focus, you can see the exact composition for any lens, and then you suddenly go from that to a rangefinder camera and you look through the little glass window and you've got no idea of the depth and the focus, and you've only got a rough estimate of the composition. That isn't for everybody. So we did a photo walk and some street photography, and despite him loving street photography, he's going to sell his M10 and buy a small DSLR camera with some small Voigtlander SL Nikon f-mount lenses to give himself a small DSLR setup instead of struggling with the Leica camera. So it's not often I see people moving to Leica and then moving back away from Leica. Maybe Leica isn't for everybody. I guess I've always thought that people that move to Leica normally stay with Leica, but maybe 1 in 100, that's not actually true. And finally, as a bonus, I had a Sony shooter with me, well actually the second Sony shooter in October, a wife of a guy who had an M11. Both of them came from Phoenix, Arizona. She had the Sony AR4, if that sounds right. I'm not a Sony man, but the problem we had was shooting in a studio, and so it was low light. So normally you'd use a wide open aperture, so we set that to the maximum aperture. You then use a slowish shutter speed, so I often shoot at 1/60 or 60th of a second, sorry, and then set the ISO to whatever's needed to get the correct exposure. The problem she had was she had a tremor in her hand, so she had to have a minimum shutter speed of 500th of a second. That means you then got to use a higher ISO. And so there's two of us using Leicas, and then she was using the Sony. And I'm like, how are you using a Sony? Sonys go up to ISO 1 million and you can shoot in the dark and you have no issues. We're the ones that have got the limitation, we've got the Leicas. And she's like, no, that's not actually true. I can't use the Sony above ISO, I think she said 3200, because it gets too grainy by like ISO 4000. I'm like, huh. So I never realised that Sonys were, I always thought Sonys were ISO 1 million and that was the end of it, but apparently that's not actually true. So I'll leave you with that bombshell. If you're new to model photography and you want to get into it, I've got my free model photography book. You can check that out. If you want to join one of the workshops or photo walks, I can put links below to those. And as always, a massive thanks to my awesome patrons. If you want to see more Leica related videos, you can watch this video next.